Before we get into it, this video is for education and entertainment, and it's 100% human-made. And this one wades into a topic people get heated about, so I'll say it plainly. Everything here is grounded in genetics and the fossil record. Let's dig. Here's a claim that sounds obviously true, and is one of the most consequential lies our species ever told itself, that humanity is divided into a handful of distinct biological races, deep and ancient categories written into our blood. It feels intuitive. People from different parts of the world look different. Surely those visible differences are the tip of some deep biological iceberg. They don't. And the deep past, along with modern genetics, demolishes the idea so thoroughly that it's worth walking through exactly how. Let's start with the single most important fact. Every human being alive today descends from ancestors who lived in Africa. Our species, Homo sapiens, arose in Africa a few 100,000 years ago. And for most of our existence, that's where we all were. The migrations that carried some human populations out across the rest of the planet are incredibly recent, roughly the last 60 to 70,000 years. That is an eye blink in evolutionary time. It is nowhere near enough time to sort a species into deep, distinct biological races. We are all, genetically speaking, recent African emigrants or the people who stayed. The family reunion was not that long ago, and this leads to a fact that stuns people every time. There is more genetic diversity within Africa than in the entire rest of the world combined. Because our species spent the longest time there, African populations had the most time to accumulate genetic variation. When some groups left, they carried only a subset of that variation with them, a sample, not the whole set. The genetic differences between a person from Europe and a person from East Asia are actually smaller than the differences you can find between two populations within Africa. The old racial categories don't even map onto where the real genetic diversity lives. Now let's put a number on how similar we all are. Any two humans picked at random from anywhere on Earth are on average 99.9% identical in their DNA. We are one of the least genetically varied species of large animal out there. Two chimpanzees from neighbouring troops can carry more genetic difference between them than two humans from opposite sides of the planet. The visible differences we're so fixated on are riding on top of an ocean of sameness. A geneticist named Richard Lewontin measured how human genetic variation is actually distributed. The overwhelming majority of all human genetic variation, something like 85%, exists within any single local population. Most of the genetic difference in our entire species can be found among the people of a single village. The racial differences that were supposed to be deep and defining turn out to be a thin slice of the total. So what about those visible differences? Skin colour, hair, facial features? They're real, obviously. Where do they come from? They come overwhelmingly from recent local adaptation to environment, mostly to sunlight. Skin colour is essentially a sunscreen dial. Near the equator, intense ultraviolet radiation damages the body, so darker, melanin-rich skin is protective. Farther from the equator, sunlight is weaker, and you need some UV to penetrate the skin to make vitamin D. So lighter skin becomes advantageous. Skin colour tracks latitude and sunlight, not some deep ancestral essence. Populations at similar latitudes on opposite sides of the world, with completely different ancestries, evolved similar skin tones independently. Skin colour is a climate adaptation worn on the outside. It is quite literally skin deep. And here's the kicker that dismantles the whole racial framework. The traits we use to sort people into races don't travel together as a package. They vary independently, each one responding to its own pressures, each one changing gradually across the map. There's no sharp line where one race ends and another begins, because the variation is a smooth gradient, a continuum. When you actually plot human variation, you don't get a few tidy clusters. You get overlapping gradients with no natural borders. The borders of race aren't in biology. They were drawn by people on maps for reasons that had nothing to do with genetics. Let me give you one concrete example: sickle cell. A lot of people have absorbed the idea that sickle cell trait is a racial characteristic. It isn't. The gene variant behind it is common in regions where malaria has historically been widespread, because carrying one copy offers some protection. Malaria doesn't care about race, So you find sickle cell in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, but also in parts of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and India. The trait maps onto malaria's map. It cuts straight across the tidy racial boxes people tried to force it into. So let's be clear about where the idea of race actually came from. Race, as a system of deep biological categories, is not a discovery. It's an invention, a relatively recent one, developed largely over the last few centuries, precisely as certain societies were building economies and empires that depended on ranking human beings. The science came after the motive. People wanted a reason to treat other people as lesser, and they reached for biology to supply it, measuring skulls and inventing hierarchies to dress up a decision they'd already made. And the tragedy is that some of the very sciences this channel loves, anthropology, human biology, were bent in their early days to serve exactly that project. The categories were built to justify how people were already being treated and then declared to be natural law. Now, I need to be careful and precise here. Saying that race is not a deep biological category does not mean that all human populations are genetically identical. There are real, subtle patterns of genetic variation that correlate with geographic ancestry. That's why genetic testing can give you a rough read on where your ancestors came from. Population structure is real. But those real patterns do not carve humanity into the small number of ranked, discrete races of the old story. Real human variation is gradual, overlapping, mostly concentrated within Africa, and it does not come bundled into natural biological tribes. The thing geneticists actually find looks nothing like the thing the racial framework claimed was there, and the study of ancient DNA has driven the final nail in over just the last decade, as researchers sequence genomes of people who lived thousands of years ago. A clear pattern has emerged. Human populations have never sat still and stayed pure. They have constantly moved, met, mixed, split, and merged again. The people living in almost any region today are a blend of multiple ancient populations that swept through and combined. There is no ancient, unmixed, pure lineage sitting at the root of any modern group. That's a fantasy. Everyone is a mixture of mixtures, going back as far as we can read. The very idea of a pure race requires a kind of genetic stillness that has simply never existed in our restless, wandering, endlessly interbreeding species. This is why the mainstream scientific position has been that race is not a valid way to describe human biological variation. That's not a fringe view or a political slogan. It's the considered consensus of the people who spend their careers measuring exactly this. Let me put the whole picture together, because when you see it all at once, the old idea just evaporates. We are an extremely young species. We all came out of Africa recently. Most of our genetic diversity is still in Africa. Any two of us are more than 99.9% identical. Our visible differences are mostly recent adaptations to local sunlight. They vary independently, and they blend smoothly with no natural dividing lines. Biological race, as it's been imagined, is not something science found in us. It's something people painted onto us. And I think there's something genuinely beautiful hiding in the real story once you clear away the lie. Go back far enough and it's not even that far. And everyone watching this shares the same ancestors, the same small African populations, the same survivors of the same bottlenecks. Trace any two humans back and the lines converge, and they converge shockingly recently. The person who looks most different from you on the other side of the world is a close cousin wearing a slightly different sunscreen setting shaped by a slightly different sky. That's not a feel-good slogan I'm tacking on the end. That's the genetics. That's what the DNA actually says. So the next time someone tells you that humanity is naturally divided into deep, separate biological races, you'll know the truth. There's really only one race that the biology recognises, and you're a member of it, and so is everyone you've ever met. The categories on the forms, the boxes we check, the lines drawn on old maps. None of those came out of a laboratory or a fossil bed. They came out of history, and often out of the ugliest parts of it. The biology was never on their side. We are a single, young, closely related human family that spent most of its existence in one place, and only recently spread out to paint itself 1,000 shades under 1,000 different suns. All the sources are in the description. the work on human genetic diversity, the out of Africa evidence, the biology of skin colour, the history of how the race concept was constructed. Read them? Especially if this challenged something you thought you knew. That discomfort is the feeling of learning. And it's a good sign, not a bad one. And remember, every human on Earth is your family, and I mean that as a statement of fact, not sentiment. So stay curious, stay honest about where we really came from. Hold on to that fact the next time someone tries to tell you otherwise, and keep digging. See you in the next one. Bye.